This is a question from Africa. We're getting a lot of contacts from Africa, probably after the announcement in the newspaper in Liberia of the confirmation of the trust. Although since then there's been another African publication which tries to demean Kim. Even though they had been, they spent the last 2 years denying the trust exists. Now it's out that it exists, and now that they're denying that Kim's valid. you know, you'll have to come up with something better than that, because too many now know. But this is how they work. And this question anyway says, you mentioned that the Trust did write a letter to Mr. Trump on January the 27th, giving the country its sovereignty back. Yes, we did. Has it been implemented yet? No. Is it still on the table? Absolutely. So if that's the case, why do we still have sanctions on some countries in Africa? Well, the sovereignty was nothing, American sovereignty technically has nothing to do with the sanctions in Africa, and everything to do with the people who really control the government, which has nothing to do with Mr. Trump or anybody else for that matter. It's them that imposes the sanctions, and Trump doesn't have enough clout to overrule them. That won't always be the case. Eventually this country will be run by the president and not by deep state clowns. And the same applies in Africa. You know, that story I mentioned about Liberia and the Man of World Holding Trust, you know, that's been replicated in a number of countries in Africa. We have sent money, and then the clans go in from the IMF or the UN with mercenaries threatening people, shooting people, or closing the bank down. Anything to stop the funding going back to the countries. And I know there's a lot of division in Africa between the individual countries and the individual tribes, but if you all got together and threw out the clans, the UN, we're not there for peace. Well, they are. We're going to take a piece of this and a piece of that. That's their version of peace, you know, and throw out the UN, the IMF, and Citibank, which is essentially the clown control bank who's operating as the central bank for Africa. Well, you don't need it. You know, the offer is on the table for every African country to become sovereign. So the likes of the Bears mentioned earlier can be thrown out, because those diamonds or those minerals and those resources belongs to the people. So it's up to the African countries to all get together and combine. As a one force, you can throw these goons out. And once we work around the final hurdle of transferring without them interfering, then there are vast quantity of funds for every African country to for either development or humanitarian issues or reconstruction, you name it. You know, Liberia is only a small country, and their allocation was 5.9 billion. Why keep borrowing off the IMF at exorbitant interest rates that renders the country unable to pay them back, when you can have your own money back out of the trust? No interest payments, no payback, no nothing. Next part of the question: why is the trust turning a blind eye while China is taking over Africa? Well, the trust is not turning a blind eye, and we don't have control over the countries, and neither do we want control over the countries. This is your corrupt officials. And it's not China either. This is the dragon groups that we keep telling people about. It's not President Xi and the Chinese government. This is the dragon groups. I think they're going to take over the world. And it's them that's posing the interest rates. You know, the country China's getting the blame, like the country America gets the blame for goose-stepping around the world and bombing countries into oblivion. It's the same groups. It's nothing to do with either country. And yes, it is a new form of slavery on a large scale, as you said. For example, Zambia and Kenya has huge debt from China. Isn't this what you call economic hitmen? Well, yes. And this is why we do the show, and we do tend to. The focus is not all America. We cover stories all over the world, and it's up to the people that listen to pass on the information. Each country has got at the top end a load of clowns and paid cabal agents. They're the ones that are selling off parts of Africa to the so-called China, which is not. And those people have to be removed. The central bank people, all of them have to be removed because they're all installed there to block anything. That's their only purpose. So they keep the old system going of harvesting. So, I hope that helps you. In Russia, they celebrate Christmas on January the 7th. Is this date maybe the real birthday or something else they celebrate of Vladimir? I don't know, to be quite honest. There's calendars dotted all over the world. The Hebrew calendar, Gregorian, Julian, you name it. They've been messing with time scales and time zones and timelines forever. Or maybe the Russians just have a different calendar. It'd be nice if it was we found out what the real date was and we had a universal calendar. There you go. The whole Ascension New Earth rhetoric has a lot of fear porn attached to it. Yeah, go figure. Nothing changes. Everything prior to 2014 is more to do with fear porn or hopium. Some basically saying you will disappear from sight from your family or be separated. My interpretation is we all ascend by DNA but stay here on Mother Earth. That is correct. But there will be, in my opinion, a shift in the frequencies from those of the higher vibration and those of a lower vibration. Many are now seeing it. It's already taken place. We're in two worlds. The sleepers, as they're called, or the saints, or even the possessed, whichever one you prefer. They're not in our world anymore. They're just not. Their news is not representative of our world and what we know. Their thinking isn't. Their lack of compassion or general care is not our world. That's theirs. And theirs is collapsing. What else? Stay on it. But our experience changes with peace, less oppression, etc. when the evil players are dealt with. Well, I've said this before, you can remove all the cabal, or the cabal decide to step down at midnight tonight, and how much is it really going to change? So it depends on what you deem as being evil. Some of us in the alt media and the Awaken group may see the sleepers as being evil because they don't care, or they won't listen, or they just carry on with the slavery, death and destruction mode. Could that not be perceived as being evil? To some, maybe to many. We have to be careful of how we perceive certain things. Why have the sleepers chosen to ignore all that's going on with the children around the world? Is that in and of itself not, or could that not be perceived as being evil? No, for many years ignorance could be excused. Now it's not. It's a choice, because all the so-called conspiracies are no longer conspiracies hidden on the internet. They've all been out on the mainstream media. They're not conspiracies anymore, and yet they choose to ignore it. So without a change in mindset for them, nothing will change in their world, will it? Which is why we have to push forward with what we're doing and ignore what they're doing until they're ready. And this is why I made the statement, immigration or migration of the future will not be country to country. It'll be from their world into ours when they're ready. And many aren't. Besides meditation, intention, personal awareness of all thoughts, words and actions, and purposeful interactions, what more can we be doing for mankind? Well, if you've done all that, then you've already done your part. Yes, you can help others, as the person who sent this question in does. You donate your time and care bags directly to homeless people, and you also volunteer at FMSC and Second Harvest Food Bank. So you're doing your part. You've been not only observed the change, you're being the change. If everyone has done what you've done, then we'd have a much better planet, wouldn't we? All you can do is work on yourself and then be available to help others. But you have to be careful of that also, because you can't help others that don't want help, and far too many don't want help. They think their world's fine. We know it's not. I just feel I need to be constantly mindful and on guard of late. A definite restlessness. Well, the shielding document that we did is important to everyone, particularly people of a higher vibration. And so you should always be aware and on guard for that. And the restlessness is, I think people are now aware something major's happening and can't exactly put the finger on it and don't know exactly what to expect or what's coming. More meditation on that may reveal a lot more. Trump campaign promises to drain the swamp is neglecting one important element: the evil Khazarian Zionists, who have infiltrated our government for almost a century, and the present examples are Mnuchin and Ross, to name but a few. Trump in the last 2 weeks, you said 2 weeks, Dave, well, has mentioned that Israel needs our help. This infuriates me no end. Do we have a future hope of disposing this malignant cancer state in the near future for the benefit of America and the world? Well, it can also be for the benefit of the people of Israel. Don't you think they're tired of it? Well, I know they're tired of it. I know they're demonstrating and they're working or trying to, despite Mossad and military oppression there, with the Palestinian people. More and more of them are realising that they've been used and abused the same as everybody else. You know, like I mentioned the earlier question, blaming China for investment in Africa. It's not the Chinese government or the Chinese people in some aspects anyway. And it's not the Israelis that have general Israeli people that have been killing people left, right and centre. It's the psychopaths at the top. Well, their ability to operate has been eroded by the day. Mr. Netanyahu is in big trouble, as we forecasted in previous shows, and that's come to light this week. Was apparently he's disbanding the government because of let's just say others' interference, not necessarily within the country. So there's a lot that's going on, and it's not as cut and dried as this question is made out, that things are not being done, because many things are being done. It's just not being made public yet. Nothing will get missed. How can I help you here from Bulgaria? Well, it's the same as the question, the one before. Doing your meditation, intentional personal awareness, and purposeful interactions for yourself, and try and teach others to do it. You know, get the message out, which I'm sure you already are. I know there are times when people feel like they're not doing enough. You know, they only work on themselves. But that's the least anyone should do. Like I keep saying, if everyone worked on themselves, we'd have a much better planet. And half of these issues, in fact 90% of the issues, would disappear overnight. So, you know, but thanks for offering the help. Maybe in future, maybe next year sometime, when the funding gets released, that you can be an ambassador for Bulgaria with that funding, depending on what projects are put forward. So we'll see, because this is what we're trying to do with all members of THI, is to get them in a role somewhere with the trust fund where they are able not only to be paid for doing it, but also able to show a different way, a different path, and not follow the old models, which all failed. Does the arrest of the Huawei CFO have anything to do with organ trafficking out of China? I don't know. I forgot to ask about that. Can you please explain what you mean by we have vast quantities of digital funds? Well, this is to do with the quantum system and the trust. It has a load of digital funds which is recorded within as an asset value within the trust. But we also have a vast quantity of physical assets. What I remember is this was the Harveston Bank before, because it was run by the Order, and in particular Marduk, and they collected everything, absolutely everything, and just handed out fancy titles and bits of paper and little pieces of metal, and that were not really assets. It's assets to us because we need those bits of paper and those little bits of metal, but to them it meant nothing. So Are cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology scams? Yeah. You know, the alt media has done a number on a number of people, convincing it that it's bucking the system and it's getting round the cabal. It's all bollocks. Sorry, it's just bollocks. Yeah, they pull the same stunt over and over again, and people fall for the same stunts over and over again. It's like BRICS. I'll remember that from around 2013 and 14. That was set up by Rockefeller and Rothschilds. Do you really think they're going to work against the system with those two involved in it? You know, it's beyond stupid. And you've seen what happened with the dinars. You know, the Bush cartel looted Iraq during the war. Every bank, they took all the currencies out. So they had loads of dinars. And as the country economy had collapsed, those currency values were now zero. That's what happens. And they found a way of making those pieces of paper, which were valueless, into something that they could sell. And they sold it to the alt media and all the RV clowns and all the generals and all the mercenaries. They were paying them with dinars, telling them they're going to revalue anything up from 10 to 30 times the value. They're laughing at them, laughing. You know, if they were a little bit of common sense, if you're the cabal, the last thing they want is the people having money. Because they've never given us any. They've never given us any out of the trust. All these fake Chinese elders who were trustees, like Mandela, like Gaddafi, like Marcos and Sukarno, another bunch of clowns who were passed off as the people's saviour when they gave the people nothing while they were trustees of the original trust. Nothing. So suddenly now they've just give a load of valueless pieces of paper away to an awful lot of people. And they collected, albeit fiat money, which is the US dollar, or the Federal Reserve note is fiat money, more false paper, which bizarrely in our world is legal when technically it's not. And everyone's sitting there with worthless bits of paper that they'll be lucky to get the money they pay for it back, if at all. So now the IMF has just come up with a scheme. Is because they don't have control of the currencies anymore, or to be able to operate in the way that they want to. The IMF is telling Britain and 133 other countries to scrap all their country currencies and go with cryptos. And yet you've got people telling you that the cryptos and the blockchain is working around the cabal. No, it is. You know, if they had control of the currencies, why are they threatening 134 countries to sign up to crypto? It all falls apart when you look at it outside of the value of it and just a common sense factor. What is the future of the Federal Reserve note, or USD? The alt media are saying that the fiat USD is going away. Well, the alt media will, because it's as corrupt as the mainstream media now. They're spouting shite on a lot of posts and a lot of shows, and they have no idea what's really going on. None. If they're talking about it going away, those people have got wind of what the Fed tried to do, which is crash the market, crash the Federal Reserve, because they've got none left, and then create another piece of paper with another name on called Treasury Reserve Note or the US note. Or cryptocurrencies. So with crypto, essentially you're getting fresh air tokens off a computer. Isn't that very Orwellian? What happens if someone decides to press delete on your cryptocurrency account? Do people think of these things? Whilst you have cash, you have control. When you don't, and everything's on a card or on a computer screen, called a wallet or whatever they call it, they can quickly delete it. And that was one of their long-term plans, getting everyone cashless society, and you have tokens or whatever else you want to call it, credits. But what happens if they decide they don't like you and delete your accounts? Oh, they won't do that. Well, 10, 15 years ago, people 20 years ago said they wouldn't ban smoking, but they did. The so-called founding fathers said we wouldn't pay tax on income tax, but we did. And there's, if someone would have said to you 30 years ago, your child is going to have its vaccines increased by 1,800% in its first 6 years, they won't do that, but they did. Common sense thinking needs to be applied. I'm wondering what the hierarchy is above Trump now that the old guard and hierarchy has been dismantled. No, it hasn't yet. Otherwise things would be drastically different. I'm guessing part of it includes the alliance. No, it doesn't. Not the alliance, that's off the internet either. Either way. There is no name of the group whatsoever. The alliance is to do with the blue chicken cult, or Cobra or whatever. This is just a new name for the White Hats. The White Hats ended in 2001. All the others since are all paid agency people. Will the quantum system be able to retain balance within the implementation of 5G? Well, some of it, as we said in previous shows, will be counteracted. Maybe people can also use their abilities and counteract it. If many do it, the harmful effects of the frequencies will go away. Will we have to drop our smart devices? Probably not. But we maybe in the future we can scale them back of negative frequencies that are not required to run those machines, and also the spyware and all kinds of other nonsense that's being loaded onto it. Who is spraying us with chemtrails and why are they doing that? Well, various reasons. it has diminished drastically this year as their funds have become shorter. Chemtrails can have two purposes. One can be negative and one can be positive. There's a rumour that it's actually stopping an oncoming ice age, which was forecast by the Russians in 1959. Well, if you put screens in the sky, you can condense the heat, which then prevents the ice. I'm not saying that may be true or not. I'm just playing devil's advocate, so to speak. But I think there's been far too much being said about chemtrails. The point is, whatever program it was and however negative it was, it hasn't worked. Now, I know privately that a number of people now, and a large number of people, have become immune to them, so they can spray all they like to those people. That's the beauty of the human body. It adapts far quicker than other species, and I don't think chemtrails are as damaging as they're made out on the alternative media. I'm not saying they don't cause harm to some people, but either way, that program also failed, because we're all still here. Another one on the 5G. Like I said, the same answer applies from 5G as I gave on the chemtrails. They're putting it out, it's all dangerous, 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 like they do with the chemtrails, and yet we're all still here. It could be that there are issues with it, and from the bits I've read about it, it looks like it's a negative frequency. But if the system changes from the old guard to a new way, then we have frequencies that can operate at 5G that heal. Doesn't have to harm. Can someone stop the vaccines? Well, you can. You don't want it in your children, stop them. Make them sign a $10 billion indemnity for anyone wanting to inject your kids, that they have got to endorse it fully. And if you don't sign it, then they don't trust it. So why should you? If they're that insistent that the vaccines are okay, then they can sign whatever figure you want to put on it, on an indemnity form that you write up yourself. Should my child be harmed because of this vaccine, you're endorsing it, and you will pay 1 billion, 10 billion, you can put 100 billion down. Should my child get sick following this vaccine, let's see how many of the nurses and the doctors sign it. And if they don't sign it, it means they're not fully trusting of it, and none of the doctors or nurses should be fully trusting of it, because none of them know what goes into it. They're assuming. And it has worked, because I know at least one of our members has used it, and they refuse to sign. So the ones dishing it out can't endorse it. Why should you? I've read the Queen of England owns the largest area of land on the planet. No doubt stolen. Is this true? No. They collected certain things, and they went down as former trustees and sovereign entities on the docket, so to speak. Except all of it ended up in the trust. So the trust owns every square inch of this planet as it stands. every square inch, both on the surface and below, apart from the beings. All of it was pledged to the trust. So the Queen of England had, there was a picture in the a newspaper back in England of the Queen visiting a vault, that the paper was saying she owned that whole warehouse of gold, except the higher order took it all off her and took everything else off her, and she's just like a pawn. Some would argue serves her right, but this is how the game works. They think they're going to be in charge forever because they've got this title and that title, a bit like the generals in the military. Once they realise that they are 98% down the control system structure, they're in the bottom 2%. Perhaps they'll realise that their badges don't mean jack. You know, the control structure, everyone on the internet talks about the 13 families being the top of the tree. They're not even in the top 50%. In fact, they're not in the top 60% or even the top 70%. And if those above them require assets or pieces of land to leverage to keep themselves going, then they take it. No matter how important or that we or they think they are, they're just not. If it's true, can it be taken from her? Well, it already has by the clowns and the order, and given back to the nation's people. Well, that's what the trust is for. All the assets that are contained within the trust is going back to the government's 50%. That has to be spent on improvements for the country and the people, and 50% of the people to decide to do their own projects. What about all the other land thieves? Well, they've found out they've lost everything, because Kim owns the trust, and Kim's given all of their thievery back to the people. Where did all the money go? If every country and every bank and business are all broke, where did all the money go? No one has ever been able to answer that question for me. Simple, went into the trust, because that's what it was pledged to. Harvesting. Keep telling people this. They were harvesting the whole planet. So, you know, this is why the age-old question is, if every country is in debt, then who's the money owed to? And yet people couldn't come up with a common sense answer. But if every country's in debt, it means there's an outside force that controls who it's owed to, does it not? And that's exactly what it was. Fulford is still talking about a financial reboot, reset. Why? Because Fulford doesn't know what he's talking about, pure and simple. You know, Ben is operating for one of the factions, whether he's aware of it or not, or whether it's even the real Benjamin Fulford, because the guy for the last 5 years has put out rubbish. You know, his last piece that I referenced on this show, he was talking about cashing the bonds. Not, you know, this is a guy, original Fulford was a finance minister for Japan. So he would know that the bonds were already cashed. long time ago and pledged, and it all went into trust. And yet he's talking about cashing the bonds, which, for those who don't know, bonds are wartime IOUs. They've already been paid off, those bonds, a long time ago. So he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. And I find it sad was the Benjamin Fulford between 2000 and 2010, maybe 11, by 12, once Wilcock got his ego head into him, it was, to me anyway, bye Ben. Because most stuff that he writes now, he's quoting P2 Lodge, which is the Jesuit secret society, which is a faction, and people in the Pentagon. Really, Ben. The Pentagon who sit there and do nothing, whilst Hillary tries to wreck the country with a number of other goons. It's up to you. I don't tell anyone not to listen to this person or that person. But the question is, when has anything they've ever said come to fruition? Answers on a postage stamp. Since a lot of information and history has been deleted from the internet, will the truth come out because it's archived by the quantum system? We've had this question before, and we've done pieces on this. Nothing is destroyed. Neither the Vatican Library nor the Alexandria Library. It's all recorded. If you have a certain frequency, you can access it. Maybe over time that'll be released to the general public. But we've got a lot more things to do to focus on our future rather than what went on in the past, in my opinion.